Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode number 119 of Storytelling with Seth, where I sit down with Anthony D. Holt Jr. as we discuss Invisible Kings, Black Power and Identity in America, discussing Ralph Ellison as well as Black Panther, and some amazing topics that arose just through the topic of writing as well as the importance of his essay in Comics Lit Volume 1. Thank you for joining us and hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Storytelling with Seth. I'm your host, Seth Singleton. Today it's my genuine pleasure to be joined by Tony Holt, a co-collaborator on the Comics Lit book. I was about to say t-shirt, but I realized I was just so captivated by your t-shirt that I was like, wait a minute. No, we didn't collaborate on the t-shirt. That is of your own amazing inspiration and design. Yes, but you've got a great cover there on that shirt. I've seen it on social media. I was jealous, not jealous, but inspired then, and I wanted it as well. Yes, wonderful job there. I will join you from the other side with there we are, there we are.
Very nice.
So great to have you on to talk about this wonderful collaboration. We were both a part of the inauguration of as well, the first initial volume one. And I loved your idea for how we could start things off, talking about the amateur versus the professional. The idea that for so long comics have lived in um, relative obscurity regarding is this a professional craft or not? Is this something that should be recognized or not? What was your earliest recognition of comics and how was it portrayed to you, either by those around you or whatever your first introduction to comics was, and how has that been since then? This idea that are they professional or not? Are they valuable or not? Should they be venerated or not? Which is something that I present to others when we're talking about this project and the idea of our ability through these essays to point to the past, to which these venerated classics, these ideas and high-minded examples that we're pointing to as being celebrated, and that for those reasons, comics should be celebrated in the same way as literature, as equal.
Hmm, that's good. Before I jump into that, Seth, first I want to thank you very much for making time for
Oh,
me today, for
my
inviting me
pleasure.
to be on your podcast, and for being a part of the same collective that put together Volume One, Issue One of Comics Lit. Very excited to be a part of that. Very excited to be here. I haven't done too many podcasts in my days, but I love the medium, and like I said, I've been digging back through your archives and getting myself prepared for this one. So I'm glad to be counted amongst the pantheon of interviews you've done in the past, and looking forward to some of your work from season five as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that recognition and
Yeah,
for the digging through those episodes. And
yeah,
I'm curious to hear what you discovered, maybe at another call, another time. But
love to.
when it comes to comics and this idea that we're talking about, what was your earliest introduction, and how was that part of your understanding when it came to, approaching this topic, as well as the book that we put together, and the idea surrounding what comics were originally perceived in as and what they have become since?
Yeah. So comics for me, my introduction was pretty early. In fact, if I think about even before comics, my dad was always a reader, and he loved reading. He always read the news. He was always had a magazine in his hand as far back as I can remember. But he especially loved crime novels. Like he was reading John Grisham before it was a popular thing. Um, so there would always be crime novels all over the house, and especially the ones he didn't want me reading as a little kid. But I'd pick them up and get into them anyway. Mom was never much of a reader, but she loved sci-fi. We'd always go see the Star Wars movies that would come out when they were doing episode one, two, and three. We'd went and go see them every Christmas, right? We would always gather around the TV when Star Wars was playing. Nightly, we would watch Star Trek, right? When the Star Trek Voyager, when Star Trek Deep Space Nine came out in the mid to late '90s, I remember sitting on the couch watching every episode with moms. She wasn't a big reader, right? And neither my parents were big writers, but it was important to them that every night we read stories together when I was a kid, when I was learning to read. Every day they would point out street signs on the way to work. So, and make me sit there, read them, and tell them what they meant. Reading has always been big in my family, and I have vivid memories of, when I was reading on my own, when I had progressed. Don't ask me what grade it was, but when I was able to kind of pick up those books on my own, and especially those starter books, Pop started taking me to the bookstore. One that was near and dear to his heart, in the heart of Detroit, where I was born and raised, bookshop that's no longer there, but carried stacks and stacks of old newspapers, old magazines, the
Mm.
racks that he would go dig through, tons and tons of old comic books. We're not talking first edition collector's items here. We're talking the comic books you find in the basement of your flooded grandparents' house. Yeah, this guy took all of those, kept them, boxed them, preserved them, and would sell them for nickels, dimes, dollars to anyone that would walk in. So that was my first introduction to, like the original 1970s Marvel Universe compendium of gadgets, right? And seeing
Wow.
all the different armors from Iron Man, Rom the Space Knights, the breakdown of Rom the Space Knights laser gun, right? Um, the original run of ForceWorks, after West Coast Avengers, that limited issue series where Tony Stark went a little bad, went a little mad, those kind of things. The original run of Night Thrasher, who got his own spin-off comic after starting the New Warriors comics in the late '90s.
Mm.
Um, I just got hooked on those Marvel stories and those, old nickel and dime comic books, and we would just go there every day, every weekend, and just pick up a few, and I'd get lost. Um, and that took me to, growing up with comic books around my whole life, growing up with sci-fi and fantasy around my whole life until I'm upper middle school, high school, getting myself into Japanese anime. Dragon Ball Z was big at the time. Pokemon was big at the time. That got me into Tenchi Muyo, Magical Knights of Rayearth. Got me into a little bit of the Naruto manga before Naruto blew up.
Wow.
Um, and from my perspective, I've always carried those two things, whether it was the books I was reading or the comic books I was getting into, whether it was the dramatic TV. Mom's was big into procedurals like Law and Order, ER, as well, versus the space operas like Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Star Trek: The Next Generation. All of those were equal in my mind in that, very akin to sentiments I picked up from your podcast, that it's the stories that matter, and it's the fact that whatever you're talking about, whoever you're telling the story to, the ability to craft that compelling narrative draws people in, holds them, and reverberates beyond your own lifetime.
Mm. That's a really great introduction to your experiences with comics. Mine was quite different simply because it was not something that my parents enjoyed, that they were familiar with. It was something that they knew about. They were both readers. My mom, I remember, began reading to us when we were kids. I have vivid memories of being outside in the backyard with her and hearing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as read to us by her. My father had never progressed beyond a high school education. He knew he was going to be drafted in the Vietnam War. He chose to enlist so he could learn a trade. He had a brother who said, "Don't get drafted. You'll just become a grunt. They'll throw you out in the fields and the jungles, and you'll be chewed up just like so many others who came before you." Plus, he had come out with um, no trade. He had been a mortarman during the Korean conflict and said, "Look, no one wanted to hire me afterwards. I went right back to the field work that I'd done, that they had done, putting themselves through the many layers of school that they got a chance to complete before he had to go off." And I think he always felt that he wanted to balance his only achieving a high school degree by reading voraciously, newspaper, magazines. He constantly immersed himself in that. So as they watched me go into comics, it was something that they didn't quite understand why it was that at the age of eighth grade, a friend gave me some comics, and I was suddenly just like I had this thing that had always been a little bit forbidden. It had always been something that, growing up, people were like, "Oh, comics, that's the weaker version of reading. That's a cop-out form of reading. It's something
Oh
that
yeah.
that only those wearing the dunce cap and other, sad examples that were, shown to essentially be, no, you don't do that. That's as far as they can aspire to. You need to aspire
Yeah.
beyond. You need to look at novels. You need to look at great literature. You need to read these um, greater works of art, and then you can begin, to aspire beyond that. So here I found myself sort of torn. Like, why is it that these comics are so exciting and so powerful and hold such a wonder to me? Why is it that as soon as they opened up the first comic book shop in our little town, that I found myself not only drawn to it, but also captivated by two brothers who had opened it together. It's called De Hoyo's Comics, and the De Hoyo brothers had left behind careers. One was in like cabinetry, and the other had had a lifelong series of illnesses, and it was a
Mm,
passion project for them. Um, and they had all these great
nice.
old issues as well as the new ones. And for me, I came up during that time where suddenly this was something I could say, well, I've got a paper route. This is my money, and no one's going to complain about, how I spend it. So I'm going to start buying these
Nice.
books. And yeah, I couldn't stop. It was a challenge to keep that going as I got older, pursuing college and sports and different things like that, where it was like, wow, I only have so much money, and I'm sorry, I can't afford the comics if I need gas for the car, or college tuition, or books for school. But I
I know that
never
feeling.
stayed away for long, right? Like, go into a
Yeah.
bookstore and I'd love to look at great books, but at some point I'd be like, there's a comic section. I'm just gonna go see what's new back there, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Many days wasted in Borders books just surfing the comic section when I needed to grab something for school, right? Absolutely.
right. Yeah, and I was always a bit of an outcast at whatever school I was at. I enjoyed the things that I enjoyed and I enjoyed the people I knew, but the times when I felt like a stranger, I would go into the nearest Barnes and Noble. I would find the comic section at a comfy chair. I'd grab a couple of books that I hadn't had the chance to read the storylines for and just sit down. And I no longer felt like an outcast. I felt like a
Mm,
familiar. I felt welcome and encouraged even to just embrace those passions, much like fantasy and sci-fi, things that I grew up loving. And to a degree, there were some parts that my parents could understand, and other parts I distinctly remember my dad watching me watch an episode of like Star Trek: The Next Generation. He's like, "Is that really what you think? The other worlds are like, or this or that?" And I go, no, I don't know. I can't say with any certainty. What I do know is I've
yeah.
learned, even from a couple of high school teachers, that these characters allow us to experience stories that can even touch on the metaphor or allegory that sometimes is harder to talk about in present day media. We can talk about
Yeah.
ideas like classism and racism, and because they have enough of a separation from our reality, those stories are allowed to be told in a way that I think they would be held under too strict or scrutiny or microscope. So it was just a way for me to see the world and ideas about the world that comics and sci-fi and other genres could talk about, that I felt that realistic storytelling genres and venues did not offer in the same way. And I think that's why it was so easy for me to gravitate towards them, because there was a freedom there. There
Absolutely.
was an opportunity, right? I think what I
You hit
love, go
Yeah, I think
ahead.
you hit the nail on the head. No, it's all good. I think I just want to jump in because I think you
Yeah.
hit that nail on the head right there about telling stories in ways that couldn't be told, wouldn't be told if it were just a straightforward history, or even in like historical fiction, historical reenactments, right? Even in the procedural dramas, you can't always express the emotion, especially if it's verboten, right? Um,
Hmm.
we live in interesting times, but 20, 30 years ago, it wasn't even through the height of the 90s, it wasn't as you couldn't be as expressive as you were. It was more of a conservative society. So subversive topics like racism, like classism, like sexism, like LGBTQT rights, things that Chris Claremont brought into the X-Men
Mm.
runs that he did that you wouldn't even have understood until you started to actually break down what was going on with the characters. That is such a powerful takeaway from what sci-fi and comics and creative literature have to offer that you don't see in any other mediums. That's a big reason for me why, you know, I believe that comics, sci-fi, and those literary mediums, and especially comics, have such a place when it comes to contemporary literature, because it's a different way of telling that story, a way that allows you to, through the fantastical realm of science fiction, through the nature of comic books bleeding off the page, that you can tell a strange story that resonates with um, someone that feels like an outsider.
And it allows those stories to almost slip by the scrutiny and reach the reader without others getting in the way and saying, hold on, should we be allowing this to happen? It's almost like because they ignored it, those stories could be told and the larger scrutiny, it's almost bypassed. It's almost like a way of getting past the gatekeepers and going, okay, so now that we've made it, now let's talk about some things that others are unable to or unwilling to, whatever the reasoning might be.
Absolutely.
I think that's a lot of fun to consider because that is a great segue for me into your wonderful essay where you take Ellison's Invisible Man and you match that up with Coates and his Black Panther run. And both of them talking about the power of identity, manipulating
Mm-hmm.
identity, how those characters are able to recognize where there is a value in hiding what their true motivations are because they learn tragically in so many painful ways what happens when they're too forthright, too direct with others, and they're willing to say, "Oh, well, you know, there are ways that we can use that against you." And even those who are supposed to be friends, familial even,
Mm-hmm.
will
Mm-hmm.
manipulate their identities in a way that can cause harm or set them up for failure. And how, through the examples you demonstrate with Invisible Man and Black Panther, we have a narrator and a superhero who learn hard lessons and also learn how to then use their identity, or in sometimes a version of it that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
betray
Mm-hmm.
their real motivations so that they can do the work that's most important, the work that needs to be done that would not be accomplished if they didn't have that layer of subterfuge that allows them to say, well, I'm going to show you what you need to see, and then I'm going to do the real work underneath that guise. So I would love to just hear your thoughts on how it is that you brought this essay together, maybe where you
Mm-hmm.
found the first seeds of inspiration, and then how through those you were able to say, okay, let's put this into an essay that can convey these ideas as represented by two great works to the
Yeah.
reader who might not be familiar with them or show them a layer of understanding that they might not have considered.
Wow. Firstly, that's probably the best concise description of the essay in Comics Lit that I've
Thank
heard
you.
yet. Better than the descriptions that I've been putting on the couple of podcasts I've been on. So that's clearly you read it. Thank you very much. I am
I
honored. I appreciate it.
I did. I
But
found
yeah,
it powerful.
well, thank you. To your point, the essay I do have an essay in Comics Lit. It's called "Invisible Kings: Black Identity and Power in America," um, and yeah, and like you said, as I was approached by Tanya Todd and AR Farina about being a part of this group, I started thinking back to, honestly, at the time I was reading the Ta-Nehisi Coates run of Black Panther and the Intergalactic Empire of Wakanda, and as I was reading through it, I was picking up on all of those ideas of invisibility. I mean, clearly, the Black Panther is a stealth, clandestine character that uses technology and tools to uh, um, wear a mask, hide his identity, and accomplish his goals both above and below the waterline, above and like over and under the radar, right? In secrecy and in the light, using it as he sees fit to accomplish the specific goals that he has. That's just inherent to the character. But I started trying to think more about what that actually means, right? If it's, in the comic book sense of the world, these were tools that he used to accomplish his mission. But in reality, outside of the comic book, what did these themes mean? What did they mean to the character? What did they mean to Ta-Nehisi Coates, the writer? And how did it relate to larger themes that we've seen in literature before? And I immediately went to Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, just from the key point of they were both found a way to utilize that theme of invisibility in different ways. And that was really where the core of my essay kind of started and where I was really going for a long time. It was really going to be focused about invisibility and the tools of invisibility and trying to find a way to kind of highlight how both of those characters use that stealth and that clandestine nature to move through the book, move through the worlds that they created. But as I started reading more about Ralph Ellison's life, about his other works, as I started reading more, doing my research about Ta-Nehisi Coates as well, I started to see how both of these writers weren't writing about these themes in a vacuum, right? It wasn't just invisibility in The Invisible Man and the unnamed narrator in Ralph Ellison's book. It wasn't just Ta-Nehisi Coates finding ways to play with, Black Panther's rich publication history and the tools and the skills that he had in his book, right? It was more about it was more of the work that these writers had been doing all their lives, bringing their personal experience to their writing and bringing their why to their writing. When I was preparing for this podcast, and honestly, since I listened to your, I think it was your kind of your, I think it might have been your first post in October to Storytelling with Seth about why I write. That's a question I've been struggling with myself as well. I started back in high school, even writing for my school publication Gallimaufry. It was a kind of a poetry, creative writing book. Shout out to Senior Rick Bowdy, who ran the publication and convinced a young Tony Holt that he actually could write, and he wasn't too bad at it. Um, but then that just kind of carried with me through undergrad as well. In my English minor, doing the Torn Page, which was my first manuscript. That was just writing a poetry about me, about my life in college, about myself. And it just kind of dawned on me, or as I've been thinking about this more and more, I realized that, while I put all of those things away after grad school, I focused a lot on business, on the job, on working in HR, building my professional capabilities up. I came back to writing and reading in my late 30s, and I started to realize what brought me back is um, a lot of what the business podcasters and influencers I'm listening to now are saying, right? One of the big ones being Scott Galloway, the power of storytelling in business and in life, and authors like Simon Sinek with Start with Why, Donald Miller building a story brand, which is about marketing, but it's about how in everything you're doing, we're telling stories, right? One of my favorite podcaster, or one of my favorite YouTube influencers, Reggie Casual, and on the Casual, uh, through a lens of combining his education in marketing, his work in the fashion industry, his love of Japanese culture, and how he weaves these compelling narratives that are about fashion icons, pointed analysis within the industry. It just brought home that I've always been a reader, and I've always been a writer, and I've always been writing to understand myself more, right? I read to learn, I write to understand, and I mostly write to understand myself. This essay was a recent extension of that. At the time, I had just changed jobs. After spending 15 years at one company, I was venturing out to a brand new company, a brand new role, in a brand new industry. And while I got the job, I was still had that question in the back of my mind, like, is this the right job for me? And am I the right person for this job? So when this opportunity came to write about a character that is near and dear to my heart, Black Panther, as I learned more about Ralph Ellison and Ta-Nehisi Coates' struggle, their history, and how they bring what they're writing to their characters, I realized this was an opportunity for me to dig in and better understand myself to a different level, and how power and identity have been formed and shaped in my life, and how I have learned what I have learned about power and identity, and how I must use it in my life to navigate the different spaces I'm in, to navigate the different cultures I'm in, from America to corporate America to the global society that we all live in. That's kind of the spirit behind it, if you will. That's kind of probably the unseen journey in the writing, because I don't in the essay itself I don't get into a lot about me, but until you get toward the end, where I start talking a little bit more about what identity and power mean to me, how me as the writer, how even you as the reader, the importance of understanding your identity, your power, and the power you have to craft it, change it, manipulate it yourself to get what you want. Right. Um, that's was a big piece of what brought me to the Comic Lit Collective, what brought me to this essay, and what reshaped what was a very simple and kind of straightforward focus on the theme of invisibility into, again, a larger opportunity for me to continue to refine and understand myself better through writing. I've strayed quite a bit away from the question, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight to kind of where the essay came from.
Actually, for all that sometimes our own perception of where we are to the place we were navigating originally towards might feel like, wow, we've really gone off course. In actuality, I believe you might have done a bit of an ellipses that has brought you right back around to the question itself. And I think it was a really great answer because not only did you share with us what the original idea was, but how it changed shape through the research that you did, through the discoveries that you made, which I think is always the best part about working on an essay project or doing research for something that you are passionate about. But then how you do this wonderful thing where near the end, you do begin a little bit of an introduction to yourself, but then you sort of twist it enough to say to the reader, and this is also an introduction to you, reader. This is a place where you
Yeah,
can begin to, pursue your own understanding of your identity and what it means to use that and how it can be manipulated by others, but also one that you can manipulate for yourself to achieve your own objectives, to realize your own purpose, to uh, seek the things that are most important to you. And I love the way you brought that into the conversation because I feel that that is something that the progression of the essay, it shows these ideas as represented through two fictional characters and then the real creators behind them. But how your understanding of that is also a revelation to the reader about the person who is writing this essay and what they can know about you, what ideas are important to you, and how near the end you start using it to define how you will see yourself, the role of identity in your life, and how the reader can do the same for themselves. And so for all the
yeah,
things that you're like, well, I think I might have strayed. I don't think you really did. I think much like your essay, you began at one place and the evolution brought us to a point where when you look at the essay, and I encourage everyone to pick this up and give it a read and consider this in context, that the parallels they hold true all the way through, so that by the time someone reads the end of the essay, they're going to find themselves exactly where you left us at the end of your explanation. And that was a lot of fun for me, especially as someone who's read the essay, because I could see those already. I was like, no, 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 you're doing fine. I'm not even going to interrupt because I can see exactly
great.
where you're going to and exactly the value behind it. And also, I think it's a great introduction to inspire those who haven't yet to read it. And I would encourage anyone who already has to say, okay, now that I've heard what he has to say about it, go back, read that essay again, see what
Yeah,
we've been talking about. get a chance to discover from that. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. I know I would. I'm pretty sure Tony would. And
Absolutely.
with with that, I know I'm keeping these relatively short because there's so many of us that I'm bringing on. But I also just wanted to take a moment now to let others know where they can learn more about you, where it is that they might be able to reach out, access whatever it is that you might be doing in the public sphere, that they can say, "Oh, hey, I'd like to see what else Tony's talking about, or what else interests him, or anything else along those lines. What is he saying outside of this essay? What is he saying beyond this conversation that we had?" So, are there social media platforms where they can follow you? Are there things that you participate in? A newsletter, anything else about you where they can say, "Wow, I can learn more," and they've given me the ways to do so.
Actually, I'm just getting started. This being a part
Wonderful.
of the comics lit endeavor was one of my life goals, becoming a published author. And now that I'm there, like I said, after putting down writing for so long and just coming back to it, I'm starting to pick back up that old high school Tony Holt that said, you could actually do this. Like you actually can write, buddy. Um, like we talked about kind of at the top of the hour, the amateur versus the professional. Art versus literature versus comics, it's all one and the same, and you can all play in the same field. So for now, my best work you will find in Comics Lit, issue number one, available both on Amazon as well as from Four Horsemen Press, Accomplishing Innovation Press. I encourage you to go and get it. Read my essay if you'd like, as well as all of the wonderful authors, Seth yourself included. Big fan of John Constantine, by the way.
Thank you.
All the wonderful authors in the book. Yeah, absolutely. Um, but you can expect to see more from me. Right now, my yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. I would say start with Comics Lit. If you want to reach out to me, you can catch me through AR Farina, Tanya Todd, or the representatives at Four Horsemen Plus. Just ask for Tony Holt, and they will know exactly where to direct you. But in the future days, as I start to build my writing back up and my focus on becoming a thought leader and actually putting my views out there into the wild, wild internet, I can guarantee, Seth, I will be back to let all of your viewers know more.
Wonderful. I would love to have you back on, and I would love to see what has transpired between now and when we get the chance to connect again. And I'm quite certain that given what you have already accomplished through the work in Comics Live Volume 1, that there will be great discoveries for us to explore together and also share with others. And I think that's going to be a really great conversation. So
Mm.
I'm definitely excited for that. With that in
Seth,
mind,
that's the best
yeah,
compliment I've gotten in a long time, and I truly appreciate it. Like I said, I've been digging into your storytelling podcast, and um, I've been learning a lot more about myself as well. And I appreciate you. Again, I appreciate you having me here. I appreciate you taking me on this journey with you, and I look forward to the journey to come.
wonderful. As do I. I'm gonna hit stop on the record so you and I can have a few minutes together. I enjoy the afterwards when we're no longer observed speakers and just able to talk freely. So for everyone out there, thank you for tuning in for this really wonderful conversation with Tony Holt, and can't wait to hear your thoughts. Thank you, buddy.